do. E-F-E-E-R, E as boy, R. Dr. Keel.
Thank you. Mr. Barg, there is a whole, you have read the detective's report.
I have.
There's a whole sequence of responses and emails and so on. Do you have that report with you?
I do.
I would like you, if you can, without getting in too deeply, to begin going through it with, let me see what paragraph that would be. On the first page, the third paragraph, Randy said he knew for a fact. You heard then from Randy that he had received no texts from the mayor.
I apologize. I thought you were referring to the incident report narrative from Detective Meidel. Are we looking at another document?
No, we're looking at that, and it'd be the fourth paragraph. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I was looking at the third paragraph. And what was your question?
You heard from Randy then that there were no text, that Bob had provided no text messages.
That is correct.
That's the first time you were aware of that?
Well, I knew that he had not provided text messages. Randy indicating that he knew for a fact that there had been text communication was something I had not heard before then.
Okay. And according to Randy, Bob lied to the city administrator. Where did that come from? Had you talked with Randy and suggested that the mayor had lied, or how?
No, the mayor had indicated to me that he did not have any text correspondence with the police chief or fire chief. Mm-hmm. And as I recall, Commissioner Gershman was indicating that he knew that not to be true because he was aware of text messages involving the mayor with those individuals.
Did you ever share that knowledge with the mayor? Did you say to the mayor, no, wait a minute, I'm certain that you did text messaging with.
I challenged him at various points, and I'm looking at my own notes right now with, did he not have some text communication with those individuals, given that he had reported to me that he had not? I did not directly say that I had an individual, specifically the person making the request, indicate that he had proof of that. I think, challenged the mayor a couple times as to whether or not he had some text correspondence.
And how did you challenge him?
Well, for example, I'm looking at my own notes now, if that's okay.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm reading from my notes, actually. Sometime during the week of July 20th, 2020, I received a call from the requesting party, that being Randy Gershman. He stated that he had strong reason to believe that the mayor had in fact engaged in texting with one or more of the individuals referenced in his open records request. I contacted the city attorney, and he stated that I should follow up with the mayor again, this time sending a very direct email in which he is asked to either confirm in writing that he has not had such electronic messages with any of the parties referenced in the open records request, or that he should locate and provide these records. That was probably, as direct a challenge of that nature as I posed.
And that's basically the email that we've seen in exhibit and.
Correct. That email was sent on July 27th, which was Monday of the next week, after it had been kind of refined, if you will, with help from the city to make sure that it was said in an appropriate and, correct manner.
Okay. And after that, there was a telephone exchange between you and the mayor? Actually, several of them?
Yeah, I called, again, I hope it's okay if I'm reading from my own notes. These are notes that I actually shared with Detective Meidel when we met with him in August. When I called the mayor, he said that he had seen my July 27th email. He had not responded in any way at that point. That had been 4 days. He said that he had no such documents with respect to the fire chief, but he did acknowledge that he had done some limited texting with the police chief, but he no longer had those records.
And what happened subsequent to that?
Well, about a week later, the mayor called me at home after reading an On Focus online article. This was on Thursday, August 6th of 2020. The article stated that a criminal complaint had been filed against him. And I noted in my notes, for the first time that I could recall, the mayor suggested that the city would have all of his records. And I responded that this was only true of his emails, which I believe I'd stated previously, going back to the starting point, if you will, of the open records request, which is why I was specifically looking for records outside of emails.
And do you remember the mayor's response?
Well, what I have is the next morning on Friday, August 7th of 2020, I arrived at work to find an email, which I believe you have in your packet, sent at 7:11 a.m. that day by the mayor to me, expressing his belief that the city has all of his records and should be able to respond to any requests. But if I can continue,
yeah.
Later that day, in a follow-up phone conversation with the mayor, I asked if he could provide a record of texts now that he understood that the city does not have these records, and he replied that this was no longer possible. And that's when he advised that he brought his cell phone into City Hall to be looked at by the city's IT staff. And I believe you've talked already in this hearing about some of that conversation.
I don't think we talked about it quite the way that we need to. So he said he had brought his phone into the IT staff and he could no longer give you his records because of that visit?
Correct. Again, going from my notes, he said in order to resolve the issue that he was experiencing, that Matt, who is Matt Sutton, one of our technology technicians, had to wipe the phone clean and do a total reboot.
And after that, what occurred that's relevant to this?
Well, I found that to be surprising because I know from my interactions with our technology staff that that type of thing, wiping a phone clean and doing a reboot, is pretty uncommon. In fact, it was confirmed to me what I really thought I knew by the IT staff, that the only time we wipe a phone clean normally is prior to reissuance to a new employee. That's after it's been surrendered by one holder of the city-issued cell phone and it's about to be turned over to a new holder.
And in the report, you apparently held a conversation with the mayor about this. He reported that Matt had wiped his phone clean. You got a hold of Matt. Did he come into the room?
No, I don't know if I saw him in person or talked to Matt by phone. It was not long after my conversation with the mayor because I was taken by his response. And Matt told me that he did nothing beyond simply helping him organize his emails more effectively. He said that the mayor had come to him and said, is there a way you can help me to better organize my emails on my cell phone? And Matt did that. It took maybe 5 to 10 minutes, but he did nothing beyond that service. And that he did not do anything that would have in any way wiped information from the phone.
So we have a situation where text messages particularly are missing from the mayor's phone. His explanation was that Matt wiped it, and then Matt denied that the wiping occurred. Matt said he helped him organize his emails, but did not wipe the phone. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So the mayor's phone is absent records that should have been reviewed for turning over in the open records request. Is that correct?
That he should have turned his phone over to the city for?
No, what I'm saying is that there are records now missing that should have been reviewed to determine if any of them were applicable to the open records request. Is that correct?
Presumably, yes. By him, if not us, but presumably, yes, that those records, which should have been there, no longer were.
Again, this is a précis report. Is there anything that the council should hear from you that's related to this matter that I've not asked you about?
Well, let me, if I can expand on my last answer, if that's okay. At this point, I had not seen the mayor's phone. So when I say presumably, on this date in August of 2020, I didn't know it was on the phone at any point, previous, current, whenever. So when I say presumably, if records had been missing, that would have been the possible reason. As far as other things that this group should know, this should be discussed at this hearing, really I think it'll be probably covered more by technology staff later, and those were the incidents of September. That's at which point we did secure the mayor's phone, and they did have a chance to take a look and see what was there at that time. And that goes back to the conversation that Detective Meidel had with you earlier about that led to the emails that I believe Councilmember Spiros asked to be looked at as far as what was found on his phone at that point. That would be the other relevant point to this discussion.
Between the time, excuse me, of the open records request and the time that you gained possession of the mayor's phone, how long was that?
That would have been just short of 5 months. That would have been from April 24th of 2020 to September 21st of 2020.
That's about what I had figured. So for 5 months, the records on the mayor's phone were in his possession and not yours.
That is correct.
Why did you delay 5 months before acquiring the mayor's phone?
Well, initially when the mayor reported that he had not done texting with these individuals, I had no reason to doubt that. In fact, that's not the only time I've ever heard someone say that. And, we trust in people to self-report. We don't necessarily ask for the phones of everyone right from the get-go. The reason we ultimately asked for the mayor's phone is because we had serious questions about whether or not texting had occurred that was not being reported. I mean, that may not explain the length of time that you're questioning, but it explains why, for at least a fair period of time, we weren't doubting or seeking. The doubt probably came in at the point in later July when Commissioner Gershman reported to me that he had strong reason to believe that texting had occurred between the mayor and individuals such as the fire chief and the police chief.
Given all that's happened, do you feel can I ask that? Did the mayor lie to you?
The mayor told me several things along the way that were not accurate. That he didn't text individuals. That wasn't true. He did. That the phone had been treated the way it was by IT, which is not true. Those types of things. And I believe, I believe he had knowledge, or should have had knowledge from what I can tell, that we don't archive texts. And that goes back to the ongoing dialogue that was referenced earlier with a citizen in our community who was very unhappy with the fact that we couldn't produce text messages that he was concerned about related to a development deal. And that had been discussed by this body, actually. And it ultimately led to the archiving service that we put in place earlier this year. But I believe he had knowledge of the fact that we didn't archive text. We didn't have that capability. So, those types of things are certainly misstatements. They're things that weren't true. Only he can account for whether or not he did so knowingly. But they certainly were statements that were not accurate.
You're really reluctant to use the word lie, aren't you?
Lying has an intent of intentionality. And when I look back at the efforts I made to get these records from him, and the fact that I believe I got, 3 or 4 at least different stories about why they weren't being produced, and ultimately we didn't get them, I could come to that conclusion. I just generally don't attribute specific motivations or intent, but clearly he told me several things that were not true, and you could construe those to be lies if the intent was to hide information from me or from the public.
It seems to me that's the center of my complaint. And I really don't think I have any questions beyond that.
Here, first of all, Steve, you've been testifying off your own notes, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Mayor, have you had a chance to see those notes? Have you ever viewed them?
No.
Since you were testifying off them, he should be allowed to see them.
At this moment?
If we can make a copy for him, unless you don't want to, Mayor, you don't have
You
to
can make a copy and I'd get them later.
get them later.
Don't need
When I'm done?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Mayor.
Okay. Steve, you and I have had this conversation many times in relation to the open records request that was done. And we've talked about this, the third page basically, which is the one where it really asks for all, it does on the second page as well with Marshfield Clinic Health Systems and the Marshfield Fire and Rescue Department. And then the third one is the Marshfield Police Department job function test, employee agreements, etc. And when you received this request, did you give all my emails during that time, or were they specific to the request?
What we do when we get open records requests, and I do this fairly commonly, is I take a look at what's asked for. I sit down, or at least discuss with the IT person who'll be working on it, what the keywords are they should be looking for in a search. We had a search once where we came up with 236,000 emails. Well, no one wants to read 236,000 emails, and just looking at the first few we saw, they weren't even anything near what the person would want. So with respect to the open records request made by Mr. Gershman, I immediately focused on keywords related to contracts, job function, whatever it is, and asked that those be the ones that they use on their search as they went into the IT system.
And so that's the way you handle it. And so if we were looking at emails, they would have to do with that, with what those key words in that. Is that correct?
Correct.
So not just all emails during that time, but specific to this,
Correct.
correct? Wouldn't that be the same format then for text messages? That would be we would use that same criteria on that text messages that are related to Marshfield Clinic Health Systems and the transport contract.
Well, with text messages, I mean, I don't believe that we have the ability to just search that way. What we would do is we'd have printed out all the text messages that you sent to John Doe, and then we would go through and see how many of the ones you sent to John Doe applied, as opposed to entering in the system on emails these keywords and only having the emails that apply to those keywords come up.
So you would send the text messages that actually apply to the subject. Is that correct?
Correct.
So if there weren't any, or there was no recollection of any that with this person on this subject, then there wouldn't be any text messages to send.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Correct.
Because if the request said, as in when Mr. Gershman did his original request to, or did his initial talk with Detective Meidel, initially it said that he wanted all the text messages between the fire chief and the police chief. And that's different from what's in the request, because if it was something like that where they want to see all the text with the police chief and the fire chief, then I could simply, to fill the request, just do an open records request if I don't have them on those two, and then the request could be filled. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I guess, just to clarify, at the time that the text messages between you and the former police chief, for example, were provided to Detective Meidel, there was a different purpose. I think I've shared this with you. The purpose was that you had indicated at one point you didn't text at all with those individuals. And so the fact that these texts even existed was relevant. But in what you're saying in normal times, that would be correct.
But out of the 200, and the texts are in there so everybody can see them. Out of those, there might be only one or two that actually fit the request of what this request is. Would you agree with that?
I didn't, honestly, at the point that I sent those messages that you're talking about to Detective Meidel, I really didn't look at them that close.
No, but my point is, Detective Meidel did what we could have done if the request came over that said, I want your text messages with A, B, C, then it would be incumbent on, I would have to do it if it was not on my phone. Right, I would have to fill that.
Right.
I would have to
Correct.
do my own open records request with city
Correct.
staff, and that would be very simple to do. However, I did not recall anything that would be on the subject of the request. So now the Detective Meidel did the right thing. He just said, give me the whole thing. But as you go through those and you look over and you see with one of them saying, hey, how about if we meet for lunch? The police chief and the fire chief, how about if we meet over here for lunch? That's not related to the request. So that wouldn't be then filled. So this is why if you have information that you believe is relevant, which I didn't, and in review of those text messages, at least with the former police chief, most of them are irrelevant. There might be one or two that would fit the request, which was my basis all along when I said I didn't do that much texting on that subject. We'll come back to that.
Well, if I can add though,
Sure.
I'm not going to dispute that with you, but with all due respect, what you told me is that you didn't do texting with those individuals. That was your initial comment to me. It wasn't about whether it was about breakfast or whether it was about job function test. You indicated that you did not text those individuals.
But I had seen your open records request, so I hear what you're saying. I just want to make sure that everybody is clear, but we'll get to that. When did you become aware that the city had been archiving the mayor Facebook page?
I don't actually recall.
Do you remember when we met earlier this week?
Well, I know you told me that there was a time when we were in fact doing so.
Yes. Did you know about that before?
I knew there was a point where we had been, and then we got out of that because it wasn't something we felt was truly anything we controlled, nor should we be controlling the content and what you were doing.
So even though when I started as mayor, that's one of the first things that I was instructed to do is get it archived, because it could be considered custodian of the mayor's record. That was the that's why we did it initially.
I'll be honest with you, I don't remember that conversation that well.
Okay. But that is what took place. And so that was taking place. Let me ask you, because I know we've now turned over the wipe things clean. If a computer goes down, let's say there's emails on the computer, and the computer goes down and it's wiped clean, aren't the emails still on the server? So even if something is, even if something is wiped clean, is being brought up, the information is still there and it's still gathered on the server. Isn't that correct?
Yes, if I went back to my desk right now and deleted emails, they're still in the system for someone to retrieve.
Right. Okay. The last thing then is, when you and Hap did come in and ask for my phone, how long did it take me to turn over the phone to you?
Very little. You met us that afternoon.
You called me over and you said, "Can we have your phone?" I turned over my phone right there.
Correct.
Is that your recollection?
Yes, you came over on a Monday afternoon, met us, and turned over your phone to us, without any incident.
Without hesitation. Correct?
Yeah. You did it at that moment. We may have had some conversation,
right? But
you turned it over in that meeting.
And so just so I'm very, very clear, the text messages, so we're both reading this the same way, and you and I have discussed this ad nauseum. The text messages that are being requested, at least the way we both read it, is the text messages regarding these subjects. Is that correct?
Correct. That's my understanding of right. The intent.
So when we go through later and we go through former police chiefs' text messages, and you could see them all, 180 or 190 out of, when we were talking about 1,100, that the number of 1,100 is an irrelevant number, because we do not have 1,100 documents regarding this. Thank you.
Dr. Keogh, any cross questioning?
Steve, the mayor makes the point that what counts are the messages, the records that relate to specifically what was asked for in the open records request. And you agreed with that?
I think you could determine that intent from what's read when you look at the categories that were being requested. You could at least make that argument.
All right. And is your understanding that there are significant numbers of text messages missing?
Yes.
Do you have any idea what is in those text messages?
The ones that,
missing.
Well, yeah, they're obviously ones that we secured from Chief Graham's phone or somewhere else, but you mean the ones that might be gone that we have no idea what they are or what they were about?
That's the point.
Yeah, it's pretty clear from what IT indicated that there's no text messages showing prior to July 22nd of 2020, and we have no idea what those may have been.
So we have no idea if they're related to the open records request or not?
Correct.
Mm-hmm. They could be.
That is correct.
Okay. But they're missing, so we will never know.
It's a fair statement.
And if there are text messages missing that were related to the open records request, that means that the citizens of the city of Marshfield or whoever are denied the opportunity to know what they are.
That is correct.
Yeah. I think that's my point.
Can I add one more thing?
Hey, you bet.
Because I want to come back to a previous point. I danced around an earlier question, and I always try to give people the benefit of the doubt that I'm not here to judge the mayor, but unquestionably he lied to me. There's no doubt about it from what I've seen in the various instances in terms of the different stories I got. Someone else can judge his intent, but I danced around that word, and I shouldn't do that. I believe that I was lied to.
Thank you, Steve. I have nothing more.
Any further, Mayor?
Yeah, Steve, we really need to get this clarified. Because Mr. Keogh is making the thing of, is if we don't see all of the text messages, then how do we know what's there? Which means on the same thing on this request, if they don't see every one of my emails regarding everything, which could be tens of thousands, much more than the 3,000 that they have here, how do they know if those other ones don't? That's why they put in the parameters of a request. And so if I do not recall talking to people about the job function test or the transfer contract, and so they are not there. And in review of former Chief Rams's, you can see I don't know the exact number, 180 or whatever it is. There might be one or two that would fit the parameter out of 3 years. And so when you fill an open records request, you don't take a look at everything, because if you wanted to see everything, then it would simply put it in the request that way, and then it becomes incumbent on me if I have to do an open request to get those if I don't have them. So believe me, I understand we're having a serious conflict here on the fact of, I believe Dr. Keogh thinks we should see them all, in which case then we didn't give everything here.
That is not correct. I don't think we need to see them all.
Okay, so you need to see
I think the pattern that...
Gentlemen,
Well, hurry up.
I believe the mayor still has the floor at this time.
All right, go ahead.
What we are talking about is the request. And we keep going back and forth with all of the text messages. If I don't believe that I have any that fit that criteria, then that is what would be given. All of the other text messages and everything else is a completely different subject. And I will ask you one final thing, Mr. Barg. Do you remember that I called you and I did talk to you and I asked you to set up an appointment with Randy and with Andy so that we could clear up? Do they want them all, or do they, or where are we at? Can we clear this up? Do you remember that request?
I do.
Did you make that request? Did you make that call to attempt to set up a meeting?
I did.
And what was the response?
They were not interested in that meeting. I will add, though, that the context of their not being interested in that meeting was, it was on the heels of a insight program you had done and made some comments about the PFC. So I'm not sure that the response was so much not wanting to talk about text messages or emails as much as it was an irritation with what you had said on Insight. But yes, they did say they were not interested at that time.
I get that, because there's been a lot of irritation with... Sorry.
Okay. In meeting at that time.
So they denied the request for a meeting.
They said they did not want to meet with you at that time, correct? They were not interested.
Thank you.
can I just clarify something? What's the time frame we're talking about that you've approached them?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't have notes that suggest when that request came from the mayor. I do recall it. Maybe I have something somewhere else. It was earlier in the process than some of the issues we've been talking now. I would suspect perhaps earlier in the summer, but I honestly, I can't testify to an exact time frame on that.
You referenced an insight program, though. Any idea when that was?
I could look back. The mayor's spoken on Insight monthly, and issues related to the Police and Fire Commission have come up several times. I could perhaps find that, or some other note that would indicate when that was. I don't know sitting here right now.
Mr. Calmy, I believe for clarification, the criminal complaint was filed on August 6th, Thursday, August 6th. We still don't know where or how. Nobody knows where it's at or who got it. And nobody knows how the information got to the media. But the following Friday, on the first Friday of the month, the mayor always does the Insight show at WDLB. So I got notification of a criminal complaint Thursday evening, and of course they wanted to talk about it the following morning.
That being the case, it probably was in August, I'm guessing. And that would make sense, that my request to them on the mayor's behalf would have been shortly after that, what would have been an August 7th appearance on Insight.
Thank you. If it's reading.
Okay. Do you want to redirect something, Dr. Keogh?
Yes. Steve, if you feel or you believe that the mayor has lied to you,
Yes.
what is the effect of that on you?
It certainly puts me in an awkward position. If you think about what was going on, I was hearing from the commission member who felt he'd been wronged in terms of not getting the information he expected. I'm having conversations with the city attorney. There's a somewhat tenuous relationship at times between the PFC and the mayor in some sense. And I feel like I'm not doing my job as a records custodian to secure the records in question and deliver them to the requesting party, even though in this case I didn't have what were all the requested documents. So I felt like I was in a very uncomfortable position for a period of time, certainly.
Given that you stated that you feel the mayor has lied to you, is your trust in the mayor the same now as it was before all this happened?
No. It's a difficult time. I'm being totally honest. As I look at the various things that were discussed, whether we had all the text, which we didn't, or whether IT had done something on the phone, which they hadn't, those types of things, they take a toll.
And there's an old saying that lies are the destroyer of trust. And I think there is some truth to that. I really don't have any more questions, and I thank you. I thank you for being as forthright as you've been.
Anything, Mr. Mayor?
No.
Okay. I think we'll take a 5-minute break. We've been sitting here for over 2 hours, so we'll take a 5-minute break. We'll reconvene about 17, 18 minutes after, and then the council will have an opportunity to ask questions.
Where did Adam go?
All right. Was there anything further from either Dr. Keogh or the mayor for now?
No.
Okay. Council members, any questions for you? Mrs. Spiros?
Thank you. Steve, I'm going to try, I wrote out questions because I kind of followed the timeline of the report from Detective Meidel. So I apologize if some of these are repeats and make for clarification purposes. So you were first notified of the open records request on April 24th, 2021.
Correct. 2020.
2020, and you've previously commented that you spent over 5 months trying to fill that request completely.
Yeah, right. I submitted the last records in August, but we were still dealing with it in September, as we've discussed.
Okay. Does the city have a policy regarding the requirement for all city employees and elected officials to be the keeper of any electronic records related to city business?
We do.
Do you know if Mayor McManus is aware of that policy, and if so, how do you know that?
In October of 2019, and this is just one example, when the city updated its policy with respect to cell phone use, specifically the discussion about using cell phones at meetings. After that, the city technology director, Eng Ung, sent out a new copy to the mayor and all council members, alerting them to abide by all the different requirements, which included that you're responsible for management of your records.
Okay. So that is in addition to the email that we talked about earlier that was sent to a developer that also clarified that.
That is correct.
Okay. All right. So you have kind of alluded to that there was some doubt, or you had started to doubt the mayor being truthful with you. What made you feel, what was the very first indicator that you felt he was not being forthright?
Well, I guess, the big moment was when Randy Gershman indicated that he had strong reason to believe that there were records sent, text messages to and from the fire chief and police chief. I suppose I questioned prior to that whether there'd been no contact with those individuals, but I had nothing to go on to demonstrate that he had any text communication with those officials at that time.
So you're basically saying you had some doubt when he told you that he didn't text at all?
Yeah, certainly he and I texted, and I questioned in my mind whether he had texted with the police chief and fire chief, for example, but I had no specific indication to the contrary. So I was continuing to walk through the paces, just trying to make sure that when I told the requesting party, Randy Gershman, that these were all the records, that I could feel comfortable as the person obligated to secure and provide them, that it was met, that I had done what I was supposed to do to fulfill that request.
Okay, and so when you started to sense he was not being truthful, was there a time, and you've kind of alluded to this, that you contacted City Attorney Wolfgram?
I actually talked with City Attorney Wolfgram a few times during this process, but specifically after that call I had from Randy Gershman in the third week of July, roughly, I did contact the city attorney and suggested that I had significant concerns as to whether the mayor had provided the text records in question that he possessed or should have possessed at that time, and asked for the city attorney's direction on how to proceed. What should my next step be?
And in subsequent contacts with Attorney Wolfgram, can you tell us the advice that he did give you to make sure that you were doing the right things?
He made it very clear, and I think that he will do so when he testifies himself here soon, that he urged me, in fact, pushed me to make every effort to secure records from the mayor if said records existed. Because again, under the open records law, we had an obligation to respond to the individual who provided that request, and that there seemed to be, doubt as to whether that occurred. So he was, in my conversations with him, he was continually encouraging me to keep pressing on until these questions were answered.
Okay. Did he ask you to get any of that in writing in specifics?
He did, and actually, soon after that conversation with Randy Gershman, he and I talked several times, I believe, and he kind of fashioned a draft of an email that was ultimately sent in final form to the mayor on July 27th of 2020, which I believe is in your packet, very directly, very expressly indicating the need to comply and to verify that if he did not have any text exchanges within the scope of the request, he needed to make that very clear in writing.
And what was his response to that email?
He did not respond. I called him 4 days later and asked if he'd seen the email, and we talked. That was the point at which he indicated, he acknowledged that he'd done some limited texting with the police chief, but didn't have those records, and that he had no such documents with respect to the fire chief.
Okay, so if I'm understanding you correctly, he originally told you he had no texts, that he did not do that. And at this point on this phone call, he said he did not have them anymore. So he acknowledged there were texts, but he did not have them.
Yes, this is the first time, according to my notes, that he acknowledged that there even was text messaging between himself and the fire chief or the police chief.
Okay. I'm going to move on to just a clarification regarding the comments about Matt Sutton, because there seems to be some differences in opinion here on what was said. Can you recall exactly what he said to you about Matt Sutton and his phone?
Yeah, he indicated to me that, and again, I apologize, I'm going to read from my notes, and it doesn't mean I can't elaborate, but it does help me for recall. This was on August 7th, 2020, after the mayor had indicated to me that he brought his cell phone into City Hall to be looked at by the city's IT staff because he was having problems. And in order to resolve the issue, Matt Sutton, the IT technician, had to wipe the phone clean and do a total reboot. And that's a note I took for myself right at that time. And in talking with Matt later, he indicated, as I referenced previously, that the mayor had said he was having difficulty with his emails and that Matt helped him organize them more effectively and efficiently, but that he had done nothing beyond that.
And you said when you later talked to Matt Sutton, how long did you wait to speak with Matt after the conversation with the mayor?
Very little time. At that point, the mayor's story did not make any sense to me based on my understanding of how rare it is for our IT department to wipe a phone clean. It was my impression at that time, before I even contacted Mr. Sutton, that the only time that happened, barring some strange unforeseen circumstance, was when an employee resigned or retired, turned in their phone, and it was to be reissued to another employee or another person on behalf of the city. I couldn't imagine another circumstance where that would have occurred. That's why I contacted him. It was the same morning. It was within probably an hour or so at the most of the conversation with the mayor, as I recall.
So pretty immediately after.
It was that day, and it wasn't much later that day.
Okay. Did you have any conversations with Eng during the months in which you were trying to fill the open records request? And if so, can you detail those conversations or at least summarize them?
The only conversations I recall having with Ing, and I believe I probably had it a couple times, was just to confirm that in fact the city did not have the ability to retain text messages, at which I knew the answer to the question because we talked about it before with respect to the developer that was mentioned previously, but I wanted to hear reassurance that in fact I wasn't missing something, that there was nowhere on our system that would have said records. But other than that, truthfully, I didn't probably talk to him a whole lot of time during this time. It was mainly an effort to try and secure what I believe might be text messages that hadn't been given to us.
Okay, so earlier the mayor had mentioned that once you delete an email, it's still captured on our server. But what you had just said about text messaging, since Eng said there was no way to capture it, if an email is deleted off of a city-issued phone, it is not on our server. Or
No,
it wasn't at that point.
If an email is deleted.
I'm sorry, a text message.
Yeah, a text message. Yeah, if an email is deleted off a city-issued phone, we still have it in our system. All emails are captured and they're archived. But until February of this year, if you deleted a text message off a city-issued cell phone, there was no way to recover it.
Okay, so deleted text messages off the phone are gone.
Correct.
That's it, okay. During the time you were working to fill the open records request, did you have any conversations with Chief Scott Owen? And if so, when did these occur and what was the context of these conversations?
I did at some point, and I don't have documented when, I did ask to see Scott's phone, and he voluntarily came in and did share it with me. And there were indications of text messaging and I believe Facebook messaging as well. Not a lot. I think it's been already stated here that it was not a huge volume, but I did get a chance to look at them and what Scott had on his phone at that time.
For clarification purposes, were you only asking about his city-issued phone, or have you spoken to Scott ever about his personal phone and text messages that might be there between him and the mayor?
That was only his city-issued cell phone.
Did any conversation occur about his personal phone?
Not that I can recall.
Okay. Let me see. Do you believe the mayor's dishonesty or outright lying hindered or prevented you from your statutory duties to fulfill this open record request?
Yes, I do. This whole time period could have been averted if we'd been able to get the messages in question earlier, and therefore it certainly hindered.
Okay, so I'm going to go to the claim that the motivation behind the open records request is political. I want to make sure that we all understand. First of all, I'd like to clarify, was the open record request a legitimate request made by a Marshfield resident?
It was.
Okay, so despite the perceived motivation, the request for a legitimate request, you are obligated to fulfill it.
Correct.
No matter the motivation.
Correct.
Okay. Do you think Mayor McManus was cooperative with filling this open record request?
I do not.
Do you think he has a duty to do all he can to help you to fulfill these sorts of requests in a timely manner, even if he is the topic of an open record request?
I do.
Is it your opinion that the mayor was trying to hide things and his efforts hindered you from doing your job?
Yes.
Do you think his actions, including failure to respond, repeated changing of his story, and other sorts of misconduct prevented you from fulfilling this open records request in a timely manner?
I do.
Have there been other times that you have had problems with the mayor in regards to trusting him or working with him?
You can slow down.
I talk fast. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Okay. Have there been any other times that you have had problems with the mayor in regard to trusting him or working with him? If so, can you give some examples?
Apart from this open records request?
Mr. Cowley, can I object to that?
Is it relevant?
Yes.
We've gone a little outside. I think I'll allow this.
Okay. Go ahead and answer.
I'm not saying never, but I don't offhand recall any specific times like that.
Okay. Do you think that you or any other staff have had to adjust the way you work or process things because of Mayor McManus?
Same objection.
Yes.
We're kind of going down a bit of a rabbit hole on
We
this.
can go past that. Okay, in regards to things the mayor has said in public on programs such as the Insight or Post-Council Conference, specifically in regards to this open records request, do you feel the mayor has misled the public at all in regard to this open records request?
I don't know if he's misled, but he certainly avoided the root question of fulfilling the request and talked more about some of the issues with the Fire and Police Commission and other political things than the actual request and the text specifically. He has generally not talked about that. He's generally talked about the picture beyond that as he sees it.
Okay. I think my last question, you have kind of already stated that you have had somewhat of a loss of trust with this mayor. I'm curious if you've ever had any members of the city staff or any members of this common council express that same sense of loss of confidence.
I've certainly heard a couple of concerns, and I've heard a couple of concerns certainly from members of this body along that line. I'm not sure I'm well suited to go into this. I prefer to just speak for myself, but certainly I'm in a political position, and I hear others share concerns.
And I won't ask for details. It was just a yes or no. I'm done.
Yes.
Mr. Butke.
Man, I could have had 3 pages of questions here, but Mrs. Spiros, I think, covered them all. One thing I want to clear up, we talked about, Steve, when the mayor requested to meet with the PFC to talk about what emails, and they were concerned somewhat, was stated that they didn't want to meet because of the Insight program just before. Did the Fire and Police Commission members ever say they didn't ever want to meet, or was it they didn't want to meet at that time?
They didn't want to meet at that time. They were, I'll use the word stung by some of the comments made on the program about the PFC.
Okay, thank you.
Any other council members with, Mr. Bargander?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Question for Steve. You've been our city administrator for a number of years, right?
Since 2011.
Yeah, and you've worked with a lot of elected and appointed officials, correct?
I have.
Okay. Do you believe that elected officials should be 100% truthful and transparent all the time?
I think that's critical.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Wagner?
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to go back to that request for a meeting that you mentioned that we know that the commissioners probably felt, and we'll know more about this later, I think, but as we talk about some commissioners, but you said that you understood at times the relationship between the mayor and the commission was tenuous. Would that have, would you like to describe what you mean by tenuous?
I think there's been some friction for a while on different issues. Probably going back to the beginning. Certainly, the job function test has been a topic out there, and I think there have been issues along the way where the commission and the mayor haven't seen eye to eye about different things, including how things are done and how things are conducted.
You're familiar with you've been around the city government for a long time, so you're familiar with Chapter 62 of 6213.
Yep.
With the duties of Fire and Police Commission. Do you?
I just couldn't do that last.
The duties of
the Fire and Police Commission, right? Okay. So basically, we have this strange thing called the special powers provision. Wouldn't that be a sort? Would you consider that to be a source of friction between the mayor and the commissioners?
I think to some degree, yes. And like you said, it's not the norm of most communities across Wisconsin that they have those optional powers that give them pretty much full control over the operation of the two departments. And yes, I would say that has caused some friction.
So there would be some natural friction if perhaps the common council or the mayor tried to assume control over the fire and police departments. Then is that correct?
Yes, I think the Fire and Police Commission is certainly watchful as to whether or not elected officials are trying to intervene in the ongoing operation of those departments, and that is a source of friction, and I've seen that.
You mentioned there was one particular issue, and I think the mayor mentioned another one in his comments. He talked about a problem with police radios and things like that, and the mayor, I think, interceded in that, didn't he?
Yeah, he certainly weighed in, and I guess exactly whether he crossed a line or not is up to somebody else, but he had a very strong opinion. Another issue was staffing. I think the mayor felt very strongly about the fact that we ought to have more employees in the department, and there was a lot of discussion about that with the fire chief and others, and there may have been some friction on that topic too. Some of that is probably natural when people disagree, but it was there.
It's not necessarily anything nefarious. It's just basically the natural friction between a commission that has extraordinary, I think, powers and a mayor.
Yeah, I think most of it was, as you said, not that out of order. It's the mayor had strong opinions on things he felt passionate about. And, every once in a while you have to say, where's that line? What's his authority versus what's the Fire and Police Commission's domain? And I think those conversations, for the most part, probably weren't too far out of the ordinary.
And yeah, and that would mean that I guess the one control that a mayor would have would be in controlling the appointments to get his point of view across to the Fire and Police Commission. Would that be it?
Yeah, truthfully, the mayor doesn't have a lot of formal authority with respect to the Fire and Police Commission, but making appointments when terms come up would be probably the most significant one.
So if one party thought the other one was exceeding their authority, there could be conflict.
Yes.
Thank you.
Can I address that?
You're going to be able to ask questions when we're done. And the council.
We'll finish council questions and then you'll have a chance to redirect. All right. Any other, Mr. Fisher?
Thank you. I want to go back to this question, Steve. When did you first receive the notice of the open records request?
April 24th, 2020.
Okay. Was that open records request eventually amended?
It was.
And when was that?
I apologize, I don't have that date at this time, and I can get that for the council.
Yeah.
That came from one of the types of things I mentioned earlier, where the number of results or hits, if you will, on one of the points indicated was massive. And I confronted Mr. Gershman with that, and he agreed to reduce it so as to not go through a ridiculous number of emails.
So when you initially got the open records request, when did you notify the mayor of that open records request?
It was about a week after that. It was the first week in May. I have it down as May 5th, which may seem like a little while from April 24th, but had some discussion with, I believe, the city clerk and certainly with the IT staff about how to get our arms around what was truthfully a pretty large and significant open records request. A lot of the requests we get are of a smaller nature, and we're able just to hand them off to technology or whoever might have those records. This one was large enough to say we need to have a talk among our team and try and strategize how we were going to pull together the various elements. So I didn't get back to the mayor until May 5th when I discussed it with him and sent him a copy of it.
Was that through email or by phone?
I called him on May 5th. I discussed it with him. I told him that the IT staff would pull his emails, but I asked him to provide the remaining items in the request, which included text, Facebook messages, whatever, as the city did not have these items in its system. And then ultimately, later that day, I showed my records at 1:20 p.m. I sent an email to him with that request attached and marking the items in question.
So I want to clarify, there was a phone call and then an email afterwards.
Correct, the same day.
Same day. What was his response over the phone to that?
He indicated that he would have no additional records, including text, to offer in response. Basically telling us to go ahead and go through our system and provide what we had.
Would that have been prior to the amendment of the
Yes.
open records request?
Yeah.
So this would have been the initial open records request that was so large.
Correct.
Okay. How many correspondence did you have with the mayor about the open records request?
Well, again, I didn't document every phone call, but in looking at my notes, I actually went a period of time into early June before I followed up with him. And most of that time was simply working with IT staff to gather and go through the very large number of emails that we came across, and the mayor has already alluded to that with what's sitting next to him on the table as a demonstration. But then on June 8th of 2020, I contacted the mayor. I told him that he would be sent a notice. We call it a Woznicki notice, W-O-Z-N-I-C-K-I, you probably know it. Okay. Basically a modified version of that notice, which would give him 5 days to augment, to provide any records he might have into the system that would, perhaps explain records that would be, we would be finding. And then I followed up by giving that to him on June 16th. At that time, and actually both when I talked to him on the phone and when I delivered this to him on June 16th, he indicated that he didn't have any concerns with the records that we were going to release, and he wouldn't have anything to augment with.
So he stated that he did not have any records at that time.
Correct.
When or if, or how, when did that change? When did that statement change? Because you made a comment earlier that he made a change in his story.
Yeah, nothing really changed until, again, and I apologize if I'm repeating previous testimony, but when about July 20th, and my notes to say the week of July 20th, I think it was early in that week, I received a call from the requesting party, Randy Gershman, indicating that he had strong reason to believe that the mayor had in fact engaged in texting with one or more individuals referenced in the open records request. And at that time I contacted the city attorney. He stated I should follow up with the mayor, again, this time being very direct, and asking him to either confirm in writing that he had no such electronic exchanges, which I hadn't gotten anything in writing from him to that point, or that he should locate and provide those records right away.
So Attorney Wolfgram obviously advised you, as you just stated. How often did he advise you? How often did you talk to Attorney Wolfgram about this matter?
Prior to the week of July 20th, I'm sure somewhat, I can't really quantify that. Starting with the week of July 20th, I talked to him a fair amount. He was troubled by the fact that we now had the requesting party feeling fairly confident that records had not been provided. And again, he reminded me of our role as the custodian of records per se, that we needed to make sure we were doing everything we could to fulfill a valid open records request. And so from that point on, I know that the city attorney took a more active role in where this went. I'm not saying that I didn't engage him before July 20th, I did, but it became more significant when we had information from the requesting party that compliance had not occurred.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other council members with questions? Okay, seeing none, chance to redirect. We'll start with Dr. Keogh.
If I were to, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if I were to sum up your testimony this evening, basically you said that you asked for records, got several responses that were different from each other, and ultimately learned that those records were simply gone.
Certainly the first part of your statement is true, that when I sought records, asked for them more than once, got stories that didn't add up, that weren't truthful and correct. As far as records being gone, we got records from other places, from the fire chief's phone, from the police chief's phone, that we didn't get from the mayor. What may have been on the phone prior to July 22nd of 2020, I don't really know. But I think the root of what you're saying, I would, at its core, say is true.
Does July 22nd have any specific meaning? any special meaning in regard to what we're talking about?
Well, July 22nd was in that week that I've been notified by the requesting party, Mr. Gershman, that he did not believe that the texts had been provided the way they should have been, because he had strong reason to believe that there had been texting going on between the mayor and some of these other individuals noted in the open records request. From my notes, I can't really tell if I reached out to the mayor during that week to talk to him. That would have been right around July 22nd. My next note suggested on July 27th, I sent the email saying, you need to either locate and provide what you have, or give us a written statement saying, I do not have any such records, to confirm what he had been saying.
And you never got that written statement?
I did not. I had the conversation I referenced on July 31st, where he indicated that he had done some limited texting with the police chief, but no longer had those records, and that he didn't have any documents with respect to the fire chief. The next thing I got from the mayor, actually in writing, which I think I mentioned, was on August 7th of 2020, the morning after the On Focus report about a criminal complaint against him. And in that email sent at 7:11 on August 7th, 2020, he expressed his belief that the city had all of his records and should be able to respond to any requests, which quite frankly, I found incredulous based upon previous interactions between the mayor and myself.
Thank you, Steve. I have no more.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, I'd like to, Mr. Wagner brought up something where he talked about friction. And in regards, he brought up two specific things. One was staffing and one was radios. And I remember that after I had just been elected, I came to the following meeting, which was your last meeting of that one. And you kind of let me have it at that meeting when I was, what I ran on a lot is for personnel. In the fire department, what I learned while I was going through is that on average, they had 9 people on staff. Now, they were supposed to have 11.
Mr. Mayor,
but this is...
make it a question?
Sure. A question?
Yeah. Or are you commenting?
I'm basically saying he questioned the friction. I'm explaining the friction. Is that...
We're starting to get a little too deep into the differences between the two. If you want to address it in your case, when you're presenting your case, it would make some sense.
Okay.
Did you have any questions for Steve for redirect?
I do, but they're along the same lines of the friction, because I do think it is relevant, and if it needs to wait until I do, then we can certainly...
Form it into a question.
If you have a question for Steve, go ahead and ask those questions of Steve.
Steve, it has been mentioned that there is friction. Can I ask you, and the Fire and Police Commission members have optional powers, which is different. They're not, the fire department and the police department are overseen by them. Can I ask you does a fire and police commissioner have the right to arbitrarily and independently go out and sign contracts committing assets and personnel without having a PFC meeting or common council? Is that appropriate?
No.
That's not. Would that be considered a violation?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how to put it, the correct words on it, but
I do wanna,
contracts, as you suggested, for committing city personnel and resources for a period of time, in that case, more than 1 year even, in one instance, that requires approval by the Common Council. Absolutely.
Right. And I have others, but I know I would just belabor it because we've been in closed session to go over many of these items. So I have nothing further.
Okay. All right. Then I guess we'll let you go, Steve, for now. Stay handy in case.
I will.
Dr. Keough